thought we would start by talking about the definition of business. So I looked up the definition of business, and it is, according to dictionary.com, the practice of making one's living by engaging in commerce. And commerce is the activity of buying and selling. And you would suppose that that is with some kind of benefit. So if you're selling something, you're making more money than what you actually acquired it for. And now we get to the music business. Well, the very short takeaway from this conference today, I think, would be that at least the performing arts, the nonprofit side of things, is not really a business. It doesn't mean it's not valid, and it doesn't mean that it's something that doesn't generate a lot of economic activity, but in the strict sense, it's not a business. And I'll give you an example. So, and this usually shocks people if they don't work in the performing arts, and you talk to someone who's a business person. So you say, okay, we're going to present a concert at Carnegie Hall. So it costs $100,000 to rent Carnegie Hall, more or less, including labor and everything. And we want to present an orchestra, so figure $75,000 for the orchestra. You want to bring a big soloist, let's say we bring, I won't name names, but let's say famous violinist, $75,000. Spend about $50,000 on marketing, which is a really small amount if you're trying to sell a concert at Carnegie Hall. So your total expenses are more or less $300,000. Now Carnegie Hall seats 3,000, and if you're lucky and you sell out at an average of $50 a seat, which would be fantastic, you'll make $150,000. So you finish with a net loss of $150,000. So the question is, why are we doing this? You know, why would you even get into this business? And so I think, you know, to sort of understand, and that is how it works for the entire industry. So every time you see a concert at Carnegie Hall, or you see a production of the Met Opera, or you see the Detroit Symphony, and you see a packed house, you can be guaranteed that everyone's losing a ton of money. So that's in a nutshell, the performing arts so-called business. And to give you another idea, so when I brought the Sphinx Symphony out to the festival in California, my direct costs for the symphony were about $250,000. And that doesn't count anything else on the venue side or on the marketing side of the product. That was just the cost of bringing 65, 75 people to California for 10 days. Didn't include soloists, marketing, anything else. And my maximum revenue that I could make from my concerts was $150,000. So just bringing the Sphinx Symphony was a guaranteed loss of $150,000. But again, we did it because there's a much bigger picture here. And I think it's important for, you know, everyone to understand how this really works. So, you know, the bottom line is when you're a nonprofit presenter, whether it be university or performing arts center or orchestra, your ticket revenue typically is a quarter to 1/3 of your total revenue. And the rest is fundraising. So those of us on the presenting side spend most of our time raising money to cover the shortfall from, you know, the fact that you can't pay for your business through your ticket sales. And, you know, people who are on the commercial side of entertainment think this is crazy. I mean, yes, when you think of it, it is crazy. I mean, okay, so when you guys saw Lady Gaga at the Super Bowl, this is the kind of show that makes money. So, you know, Lady Gaga comes to a big stadium, they sell 80,000 seats, and they have an average ticket price of several $100s. They walk away with millions. She gets paid $1 million. The promoter makes $1 million. Everyone's happy, and they walk away. That's like, this is a true business model. And then in the performing arts, unfortunately, that's not how it works. It doesn't work like that for any of the big names either. And in fact, the bigger the name, usually the more money you end up losing. So that's just like just put things a little bit in context to explain how this business works. And, you know, of course, I'm giving big examples to have an effect here, but if you're presenting a string quartet in a chamber music series, it's probably going to be a similar thing. If you want to bring, you know, a top-level quartet that's going to cost you $15,000, $20,000, you cannot make that at the box office in a small venue. So just to give you an overview from the presenting side, so I run two rather important festivals, one in California and one in Florida, I spend my days figuring out how we're going to raise more money, and that can be sponsorship or it can be development. So finding companies that'll support what we're doing, like this. Well, we had the logos earlier, or going to individuals and foundations and seeing if they will support you. And the good news in all of that is that there's a lot of money in sponsorship, there's a lot of money in development that people are actually happy to pay to make up the shortfall. So it's not saying that all of the performing arts organizations are losing money. It's just very hard work to raise the money to make this happen all the time. And then I thought I would give you just a couple of other examples of other types of business. So the record business, of course, I'll let Damien talk more about that, but the evolution of the record business. So let's see, again, we'll talk about the classical record business. It used to be, so when I started working at Columbia Artists in 1995, so that's, more than 20 years ago. Many of our top artists were making most of their money off their record sales. So they would make a lot of money playing concerts, but a top name would be earning 6-7 figures off of recordings. And if you think of, if you're making, let's say, $1 on each record that you're selling, and there have been famous examples of records that have sold over 1 million copies in the classical business, whether it's Nigel Kennedy's Vivaldi Four Seasons, or Vladimir Horowitz's Tchaikovsky Concerto, or Glenn Gould's Goldberg Variations. Every time they released those records, they made $1 million. And in those days, that was a lot of money. Of course, these days, and I said a little interesting tidbit. So when I was working at Columbia Artists, we were still managing the estate of Glenn Gould. And so Glenn Gould had passed away already, 15 years before that. And I wasn't personally working with it, but one day I saw in our business office a royalty check for Glenn Gould, who had been dead for 15 years, and it was a $200,000 check that was coming to his estate. So just to give you an idea that there used to be a lot of money made in the record business. Of course, these days, the record business has changed considerably, especially in the classical side of things, and it's gotten to the point where if you sell 100 units in a week, you will be on Billboard charts. So that's why you have people like Time for Three, who were my clients for 6 years. They would sell at their concerts. They would easily sell 100 albums in a week, playing a few concerts, and they would end up on the Billboard classical charts just by selling at their concerts. And these days, if you sell 5,000 units of anything, it's considered a smash success. So, but again, we'll talk more about that later, but just to put things in context of the record business. The publishing business. So it used to be a very lucrative business, and someone like Johannes Brahms actually became a multimillionaire with his publishing rights. People don't necessarily know that, but he was also a very shrewd investor, but people became very, very wealthy. And of course, here in America, George Gershwin did extremely well, and his estate is still doing extremely well. Philip Glass is someone who is probably the most successful living American composer today. And just to give you an idea, his operas have been performed more than 300 times in the last 5 years. And every time his opera gets performed, you can imagine that he gets a nice little check for that. But again, on the publishing side, you can sell sheet music. You get performance rights when your music is being performed. You get broadcast rights when your music is being broadcast. You get synchronization rights when your music is being used in films or in commercials or on the internet. There are lots of different revenue streams for that. Now, my question to you guys is, who has bought sheet music in the last year? Okay, that's good. I'm happy to see that, because I know that a lot of people are using IMSLP these days, and downloading pretty much anything you need. And the proof of that is that the last music store that was left in New York closed last year. And so if you want to buy sheet music right now in New York City, there used to be 2 large stores. One was right behind my office. It had been there for 150 years. Actually, the only place that's left is the Juilliard bookstore right now, I think. That's the only place you can go to buy sheet music. But anyway, that business has changed a lot. And how many of you have bought a CD in the past year? Good. Well, again, I used to buy a lot more CDs. And I have to say, if there's one side of the business that is still paying for its music, it would be the classical side of things, more than the non-classical. People in the classical business still believe that they should pay for this product, and there's much less theft, or let's say, sharing going on. So anyway, so what does all this mean? Does this mean the death of classical music? Absolutely not. And I think that's another very important point to make, is that you know, when we were talking about this before the session, you know, people love to talk about the death of the arts and the death of classical music. I think that there's never been a better time to be in the arts. There's more activity going on right now. There's more going on in the performing arts. It's just a different type of business, but there are more concerts, more performances, more activity, and I read a statistic that the performing arts in New York City generate more activity, more economic activity than the sports teams in New York City. And when you think about that, you're like, is that even possible? How is this possible? Well, the reason it's possible is that you know, Carnegie Hall and Avery Fisher or Geffen Hall and Tully and the Met Opera and New York State Theater, and all these are operating every day, pretty much. Maybe they're dark on Mondays, simultaneously, whereas the sports teams play once a week, and they have off seasons where they don't perform, where they don't play. So there's a ton of economic activity generated by the performing arts. And also to give you an idea, the Met Opera's annual operating budget is over $300 million. So there's a lot of money coming in and out, and there's a lot of activity. And I see this period as an extremely positive time to be in the arts. And I wouldn't switch what I'm doing for anything else. It's exciting, it's creative, and we all have the tools now to do so much more than 25 years ago when I started to work, where it was very difficult to get anything done. I mean, I was a manager at Columbia Artists, you know, 25 years ago, and to have a young artist or anyone come to my attention was impossible. What are they going to do, send me a cassette by mail, or are they going to knock on my door and say, can I play for you? You know, these days, I get YouTube clips every day, and I watch them. I want to know who's out there, and I found some great stuff. So I think it's a very positive time to be in the arts, but I think it's often very helpful just to understand the economics behind everything we do. So that is the end of my little expose. So, Jonathan, if you want to say a few words.
Sure. Thank you. I'm glad you ended on a positive note, since it can. How many young sort of students and/or young performing artists sort of you consider maybe yourselves emergent? Great. Don't be scared. It's all good. I think, you know, I can speak to the perspective of actually working with young professional artists, and particularly students who are aspiring for a career, maybe even have already started their career, they just don't know it yet. And I guess, you know, thinking about this time in the world of classical music and in the arts in general, I think what you're speaking to, Charles, is the idea that there's never maybe been a better time to create opportunities. And that's really what I do. In entrepreneurship, we really define it or frame it as a process of self-starting your career. So, you know, that's what I need to do, is to help people understand how they can create new opportunities for their work. But what's interesting is that, generally speaking, I think in the performing arts, we have a reverse engineered approach to that. So here's an example. If you were to take an entrepreneurship class in a business school setting or in another setting, the process is usually like this. You find a problem that you think the world needs to have solved or community needs to have solved. You brainstorm, you know, different ways to solve that problem. You do customer discovery and identify where the need actually lies and who's suffering from that problem. You test out a bunch of ideas. You pick the best one. Hopefully you get some investment or some support for it. You scale that solution up, make money, and then at some point, you know, you might exit or pivot. But if you tell that kind of process to a performing artist, what they'll say typically is, I already have the solution. I need to make art. That's why I'm here, right? I don't think just about anybody goes into the performing arts, whether they're going to work on sort of the commercial side or on the nonprofit side, purely to make money. They're, I'd say, generally driven by some sort of love, some passion, some kind of need to create, and to make the world better, sometimes in a very intangible sense, through that work. And my experience has been that actually in helping those students think about money, that we actually have to honor that process. And so I think what you're speaking to here, and one thing that I would just make a quick comment on, is that there are, these sort of changes have promoted an evolved business model for the performing arts and for individuals. And as long as in our process of cultivating entrepreneurship in artists, I think if we can start with what the aesthetic values are and bring that into the discussion, it helps young artists think more about the money side. So it doesn't become a binary equation. It's either I'm in it for the aesthetics or I'm in it for the money. And that's a very tricky conversation to have. But I think we're in a time where it's easier to have that conversation because it's so pressing upon individuals to make those opportunities to succeed. So that's something that I've observed and I'm excited about. So.
Great.
So, excuse me. How many of you worry about money? Anybody? Okay, I thought so. Would you believe me if I told you you don't have to worry about money? Okay? I don't have a magic pill, but I do know that if you think more about it in an organized fashion, you can worry less about money. A lot of times, worrying about money can get in the way of us creating our art. And so people tend to not want to think about money at all. But if you can strategically think about money and how you handle your finances both on a personal and a business side, you can have a lot less worry and be able to spend more time focusing on your art. So the biggest challenge, and is really kind of the first step in not worrying about money, is probably the thing that you don't want to hear me say at all, is to get rid of debt. Okay, how many people have debt? You don't have to be ashamed. I'm right with you. Okay, so if you have debt, and if you don't have debt, try your hardest to avoid it. If you do have debt, you need to approach things from the most organized perspective you can of how to get rid of it. The one person that I refer to the most as far as advice and ideas about handling finances would be Dave Ramsey. Has anybody heard of Dave Ramsey? Few people. Okay, if you haven't heard of Dave Ramsey, I highly encourage you to research him. He has a really excellent book, The Total Money Makeover. He has a theory that's kind of sectioned into 7 baby steps about how to gain financial freedom. The first step, and I won't go through all of them, but the first step is to save a temporary emergency fund of $1,000, and then the second step is to get rid of all debt besides your house payment. There were a lot of people that raised their hands that are kind of in the younger age group, so that's usually not a concern at this point, but many of you, I'm assuming, have student loans. Out of the people that raise their hand, do most of you have student loans? Okay, so I see a very enthusiastic hand in the back. So that second step is going to be really, really important in you gaining that freedom to be able to really do what you want to do on an artistic side. How do you get out of debt? Well, and this is one thing that I tell my students about any question that they have for me. The number one step is to be organized. You have to get organized in order to accomplish any goal. As far as getting out of debt, everyone's situation is going to be different because everybody has different types of debt, but the first step is always getting organized. Going back to Dave Ramsey, the 7 steps that he has are in the order that they're in for a very specific reason. Obviously, you want to get rid of all debt before you continue through your financial journey, but you do need some type of emergency fund. If you have listened to a lot of advice about finances before, most advice would tell you to have 3 to 6 months of expenses saved up, right? Well, yes, you do need that. However, saving up all that money will do you no good if all of the debt you have is continuing to gain interest. So that's why he says to have, the temporary emergency fund first, and then get rid of all your debt. Then you get to the 3 to 6 months of emergency expenses later. So I highly encourage you to research Dave Ramsey and his 7 baby steps to financial freedom. It's the most organized and logical plan that I've seen, and it works for a lot of people. Really, really encourage you to look into that.
Yes, hi. I just took down a few notes so I can be concise. I'm a person who had to pull myself up from my own bootstraps with real life situations, being a performing artist. But I dealt with real life situations. For example, my mother had Alzheimer's, and I had a really strong decision to make. I had just been accepted to Manhattan School of Music, and my father had just passed, and I had to decide, okay, am I going to go back to Georgia and leave music alone and take care of my mother? She needed care 24/7, or am I going to stay in New York? So I immediately had to think, what am I going to do? Either I let all of these years that my parents who adopted me had prepared and invested in me to do music, am I a good son and I go home, or do I stay in New York and try to be a starving artist and pay for a caretaker $4,000 to $6,000 a month to watch my mother, as well as take care of bills? So that really was that's really what pushed me into business. And then also, shortly after that time, being a Sphinx Medal of Excellence recipient really helped me a lot to be able to have some money to put into certain things musically. So I just want to share these things with you. Investing is so important, but investing in yourself. Sometimes the things that you invest in, you may not see the harvest then, but you have to see the harvest later. So sometimes with business, you have to take money that you make from a gig and put that money into something, whether it be a CD, whether it be a photo shoot, something important, coming to SphinxCon, something that you have to pay for yourself, a festival. Sometimes you have to invest in yourself. Another thing is education is very important. Coming to panels like this, connecting with people, networking is important. I even took some time to go study at NYU in the music business program, because I said I don't want to just be, a performing artist who, knows a little bit about business. I want to be able to speak the jargon, speak the language. I want to network and know people that are actually working at the major record labels. When I first moved to New York, I was actually an intern. Then I got a job at Sony Classical, but that was years ago when the classical music industry was a lot different than it is now. Another thing is visibility. Visibility is very important. Your brand, how you brand yourself, how you present yourself to people, what your YouTube clips look like, what it is that you're passing out to people, how you dress, how you engage and interact with people. Publicity. 3 or 4 more things. So networking is imperative and essential. Then I got hit with the big situation. Sometimes we are always thinking we're students or the emerging artist, and we don't prepare for those moments when you hit the big stage and the big money comes in. That happened to me. I had a contract way over $500,000, and I was contracting other musicians, and I was just, I'm excited, I have my business. And then I did not know what to do with the IRS and taxes. And to this day, I'm still dealing with tax lawyers. I have great lawyers, because I'm able to prove everything, because I kept excellent records and I was organized, because I dealt with other musicians and friends that I contracted for this great tour who were running from the IRS, who hadn't paid their taxes for 4 and 5 years, and I didn't know they were my friends. And thank goodness, no, it's true. Contracting is important, so I made people give me a W-9, but something said on their contract, make them write their name, their social, on the regular contract. And they're like, why are we doing this? I don't know why I did it, but that's the only thing I have now that my lawyers have been able to present to the IRS court or whatever federal court in DC to prove that I paid these people, because people were lying and giving me, they would change 1 digit on their social security, or they had an address that they were a student, like at a college or somewhere they know they didn't live. And so then I was responsible for all these people. So can you imagine if you've got a $700,000 contract and I'm the business? On paper, my business looks huge. Even my publishing company, I did spiritual sketches with Lawrence Brownlee from the Metropolitan Opera. People are like, it's this big company. No, it's me. So I have to wait till I get back in town and ship out the music, but I try to do it professionally. But you really have to make sure your tax ducks are in a row. Another thing is, I just want to talk about, contracts. What you need is a team. And I'll just mention these and maybe we can talk about this. You need an excellent lawyer or lawyers. Some lawyers are better in certain areas, whether your music is going to be licensed, synchronization, whether you need people that know people at ASCAP or BMI or CSAC, lawyers that can help you with regular contracts, lawyers that can help you if your music is going over into jazz or into world music, lawyers that know people at IMG and those types of places that have relationship. Then you need to have a business banker. Okay, you've got to have a business banker. You've got to walk into a bank, have the manager that knows you personally. If we're talking about business for the performing artist. I suggest to each of you that you have to have multiple streams of income and that means you need to have multiple bank accounts at multiple banks. You do not need to be on the road as a performing artist and then get stuck. So you got to have credit cards. Well, if you have bad credit, I had horrible credit. What did I do? I got a secured credit card. Now I have excellent credit. I have American Express cards all over. I'm excited about that. No, because it makes a difference when you're on the road and when you have business and when people look to you as the leader, and you may need to do something and you don't have the cash flow, but it's good to have credit to be able to make things happen. Another thing you need to have is a publicist. Sometimes that costs $2,000 to $4,000 a month. A month. And a lot of people say, oh, we see you're visible or your company's visible. A lot of that is investment, that I've invested $2,000 to $4,000 a month for 2 or 3 years at a time to get a publicist that could give me that visibility. You need a booking person. You should not, even if you feel like you don't have management yet, you should not be handling your own bookings. It's better to let somebody else negotiate for you, even if it's your boyfriend, girlfriend, a friend, a cousin, even if you're sitting right there beside them while they're on the phone coaching them. It's better that you have someone else be your mediator. And then finally, you need to find investors. It doesn't matter, look for family, look for people that are connected to you in your community. Find people that can invest, whether it's baking a cake after your performance, you can network, whether it's people that can sponsor you. They may not have $200,000, they may only have $50, but find community, find a good base, find people that can invest in your business. And when you keep the idea of having investors, donors around you, then it helps as you grow and as your business, as your brand grows, you'll always keep people and companies and entities around you that can invest into your brand and what you do.
Thank you. So we have about 15 minutes left, and I think if we want to take some questions, then it'll be a good way to end. So, and just a request, when you, do we have a microphone for
It's over there.
Yes.
Yeah.
So if you want to ask a question, please walk to the microphone and face the camera so they can see you, and we can hear your question also.
Good morning, Emory Kidd from Alabama State University. I teach recording technology. I'm down there. My question is for Mr. Sneed. Once you got that major contract, did you have an LLC set up, or was that a sole proprietorship?
No, it was a sole proprietorship, although I do have, at that time it was sole proprietorship, I do have an incorporation. I have a corporation, Inc., but that was just through my sole proprietorship. That's why it caused a lot of trouble, because I wasn't expecting to get anything that large.
And could you tell our younger audience the benefit of having an LLC or some type of corporation set up under your name?
It helps for lawsuits. It helps with business. It helps with opening bank accounts. It helps a lot. I can't begin to go in to all the detail, but it's very important to get yourself in a corporation and/or an LLC as soon as possible.
And that can be it's not a quick process.
Depending on what state you open it in.
Right.
New
so,
York is the worst.
Right. So I opened an LLC when I started my company, and it took me several months. But I'm also very glad that I did it, and I had a very good attorney working with me. So yes, I can't stress enough how much I support your idea here of getting a professional team around you. You need to have. You have a lot of well-intentioned people out there who don't know what they're doing, and it's important to have people who have been there, have the knowledge and the experience to help you.
Hi, my name is Garrett McQueen. I'm a musician, and I program and produce public radio. My question is about putting music out there to make it available for stores and even radio. Let's say you have a project that you're really interested in, or someone else you're really interested in. Is it more viable to try to create your own label and put the music out there, or to try to break into one of the classical labels that are already out there, like Sony or Deutsche Grammophon or any of those?
Well, I guess I don't know if there's one simple answer to that question. I think, and I would anybody on the panel I would invite to jump in on this too. You know, it seems to me from the conversations I've had with touring artists and those that are recording today that a lot of those opportunities come from relationships, as much as they come from the quality. There's a huge surplus of quality. Recorded music. And so the decisions are made based on that and often other factors as well. And so, if you don't have established relationships with those kinds of record companies that you might want to work with, I'd say that's maybe the first step, and see if there's a match in terms of interest in the project. Because it's not just a matter of having Sony on your your album, right? It's what a company is going to invest in to support it. And there's so many other kinds of, I mean, there's just a huge diversity, right? You've got a label like Innova, which really is very supportive and artist-focused. You also have New Amsterdam, which is trying to turn classical music into sort of indie music in a way. So, you know, it's more than just the status, I think, that you would want to consider. It's what kinds of interest there might be from different entities. And there's certainly lots of successful people who are releasing projects on their own or through in collaboration with other, you know, professionals, not necessarily through a major label. So I think that would be my advice, is that it really depends on the scope of the project and who your target audience is and how you want to distribute it.
Also, I was going to say, for people that have independent record labels, they do it as a means if they can't get into other labels, but it's very difficult. Well, I haven't made much money on any project because I spent more money investing in radio. What do you call them? I'm just saying radio DJs, but people that will put personalities that will play my music, that will get it out there, getting into stores. The investment of actually having to send out 400 copies of a brand new CD out to different people across the world, that's expensive. So everybody now says, oh, I can DIY, do it yourself. That's very expensive, and if you don't have relationships still with people in the classical world or in certain worlds,
Right.
You'll just make a nice CD with a pretty cover, and it won't get anywhere. So you really have to weigh it.
Yeah.
Hello, everyone. My name is Dara, and I am currently managing my son. He's 12 years old. His name is Maxwell. You may have heard his question last night. So I agree firsthand, and my background is in business. I have a MBA, a business degree in marketing. My husband is knows a lot about business as well. He's an engineer, but he knows a lot about business. So in terms of what you were saying earlier about that you do need a team, he does have a team. Currently, he does not have a lawyer, but he does have a business banker, multiple streams of income, a publicist, booking person, investors, and sponsors, and they all currently reside in his home.
Especially the investors, right?
The investors reside in his home. I am, because of my background in business, always thinking about what comes next. And he currently rents a violin in Cincinnati at Antonio Violins, and they have him on the highest instrument rental that they have available. So it's expensive, and another one of his sponsors, Abuela, pays for that. But we know that the next step is that he's eventually going to need his own instrument. He's already at a full size. And my plan, quite honestly, is to obtain some type of sponsorship, grant, something, because he's so passionate about what he wants to do. And so my question to you as a panel is, I've been saying this for the past year, that's what we're going to do, but how do I begin the process of making that happen? How do I begin to reach out to make sure that does occur? I've already said it, so it's going to happen, but I just need to know what do I need to do?
I'd say invest in a publicist that has, and really invest someone that can get him in TV, print, magazine, and get him performing in places, even if it's just a promotional thing where people will know about him. I'm just hearing about him for the first time. So how many people just heard about him for the first time? Yeah, so see, we should have known about him. He sounds like he's amazing.
Okay.
Yeah, so find a publicist that way everybody in the world will know who he is.
Got it. Thank
And
you.
people, that's another thing, another one of my favorite sort of mantras is that people only buy or support what they know.
Right.
So I'm always telling people, if it's basic branding, and there'll be a discussion tomorrow about branding also. If people don't recognize your brand, yourself, they will never give you money. They will never buy a ticket to your event. They'll never buy a CD. So really getting known is really the first step. And it's the same thing for me when I'm trying to raise money for my events or I'm trying to raise money for some big project. People won't just support the project because they think it's cool, you know. They'll support it because they've heard about it. So.
Okay. Thank you.
And I just want to add, find a publicist that will really work with him to continue being himself. I know many of us met Maxwell for the first time last night, and he has a beautifully bright personality, and that will carry him a long way. But you do need a publicist that will encourage him to be himself while still refining his image and really making sure that he can get himself out there and be seen by the right people and by lots and lots of people.
Okay. Thank you. And that's what he wants.
Morning, everyone. My name is Daniel Bartholomew Poiser. I'm the assistant conductor of Kitchener-Waterloo Symphony and the community ambassador and assistant conductor of Symphony Nova Scotia. And I guess I'm starting a little bit like I was a teacher first, so now I'm at this delicate stage where I'm trying to get my name out. And I'm getting concerts with different orchestras, but I'm wondering about management. How, as a young conductor, young-ish conductor, do you know when to get a manager, and how do you go about that? And then the cost of the manager versus what they're bringing in, and trust. If you could just speak a little bit to anybody on the panel about that. That'd be cool.
Well, I'm happy to talk about that since I was a manager for 20 years. I would say that the basic idea of a manager is someone who that you trust and someone who will speak enthusiastically about you, who will be your champion, your spokesperson. And there's this other myth that, yes, I did work at some of the biggest agencies, but it doesn't mean that having a manager from a big agency is going to be more successful than an individual person, as Damon was saying, your best friend, your cousin, who can advocate for you. And there are plenty of examples in the world right now of very important conductors who do not have an important agent. They have someone who's their personal representative, personal agent, and they, like Kurt Masur, I can speak about him because he passed away. Kurt Masur did not have a manager, believe it or not. He had a personal assistant who took care brilliantly of all his stuff. At the same time, I would recommend, it sounds like you're doing great, by the way, so congratulations. I would say, again, the same idea of getting in front of people, getting people to know you. In a conductor's case, I know that what a lot of managers are looking for is, once again, a good YouTube clip. And I know in North America it's very difficult to do because of the union issues, but if you can even get a group, a student orchestra or a community orchestra together and get a really good video of you conducting, that I would say is probably the most important investment you can make at this point, short of flying people over to hear you in Kitchener or Nova Scotia, because you want people to see you or to hear you. So, and that's, I know in the management role, there's always, can we get a video? And the answer is always, I have a video, but I can't use it. So that would be my first priority.
Great.
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Hi, my name is Paula Marquez. I'm an executive program coordinator for Detroit Children Choir, and I'm also a composer. So I have a question for you guys. We are talking about classical music. What about new music? And what is happening out there in terms of the business world, especially with the rights, the sheet music, publicity, all the stuff. What is happening there?
Well, I think it's pretty, I'm sure everybody has perspective on this. I think it's pretty varied as well. You have an organization like ICE, International Contemporary Ensemble, that has something like 130 some concerts a year, and they have a $2 million operating budget, I think. And it seems like I think they say every other day there's an ICE event going on somewhere in the world. And they have little pockets, little modules of their group that go out and do things. And then you have an eighth Blackbird that's very different. They're all of them at all times together, that create the special experience. And it seems to me that in terms of all these groups have to work within the multiple income streams that we've already spoken about. And so quite often the touring may not provide more than, even at a high level like an eighth Blackbird, more than to cover the costs of the tour. And so, but it's going back to the general principle I think we've been speaking about in these last few questions is that, when you're looking at sponsors, donors, investors in one way or another who are investing in your project, it's much easier to invest in something that is succeeding than something that's in crisis. And so all of these, and that's generally what people do who want to support. They want to support a person. Even though the art, of course the art's great, but there's so many options. I can support art in so many of these ways. Why you? Why this project? And it's often about the person that's driving it. And so, finding a way as a new music artist to cultivate success and to frame that is just one way, I think, that one commonality that all of these different ensembles and composers as well are finding money. And I'm sure that there's still, there's more money in, say, getting a commission to write an opera or a symphony than there is to write a chamber piece. But there are other values that come with that, right? If a group's going to play your piece 12 times or 15 times and go all around the country, not to mention the money that you might get from ASCAP or BMI, just the exposure could be well worth it. So I think there are many different models.
So I think we have about 3 minutes left, so maybe a couple of more questions.
Hi, my name is Jasmine. I'm a junior at Ohio University, and I'm a violist. And my question, I have a couple questions actually. If I'm trying to start a performance career, whether that be like solo or chamber music, how do I make sure the people who I hire / the people who are mentoring me are telling me the right things? And how do I filter through like all the things that they tell me? A lot of people say a lot of right things, but there also like might be a few wrong things in there. And how do I decide which ones?
I'll say this. I won't say who, but one of my mentors really was upset with me for finishing college because they told me that they felt like I had a brilliant career, and I should just perform. And they told 2 other people that, but I disagree with them. So we actually stopped speaking for about 2 years. And now, well, you know, a mentor, that's good. You need some people that are going to rub you the wrong way. But, you know, now they're like, you made a great decision, you know, and they're always a proponent for education. That's why I won't say who it is. But you have to just have a gut feeling. Just like the gut feeling you have after you perform a piece and you feel like you reach somebody. To me, it's just, you just have to have a knower within inside yourself, because there are always going to be people that will tell you, especially a publicist and especially a manager. Now, I have a publicist, but we go back and forth sometimes. Like, this is my brand. I know you have an idea, and if you don't come to the table with any, especially with business, with what you want, like you said, people want a personality or a person, you can really just be cast astray. Like, they'll just make you anything, and your career may not last. You really have to hold on to what it is that you feel like you're called to do and what you're supposed to do.
I would also say to read as much as you can about the different types of people that you need on your team, to find out what types of work styles are out there, what types of things you should be looking for in your representation. Because if you don't know anything about their job descriptions, how do you know what to look for? So read as much as you possibly can.
Do you have access to any kind of courses or seminars on sort of music business or the nuts and bolts, like different elements of music business?
Just business in general, but not music business.
Yeah, so what you might do is also find some, just going off what's already been said, you know, finding another kind of formalized opportunity to study, you know. So it may not be that you have a class, but if you're doing self-study and you find somebody who is an expert totally objectively outside of, you know, your immediate circle, who can become a mentor specifically to help train you to become more fluent in some of those basic business skills, that's going to probably empower you, because you're going to become feel like you're more in control of the sort of the foundational do's and don'ts, so to speak, and that I think might be helpful too.
And I'll just actually recommend an excellent book that I read many years ago when I started working in the music business. It's called What They'll Never Tell You About the Music Business by Peter Thal, Thall. It's available on Amazon. And I remember, you know, when I started, I trained as a violinist, right? So I show up at Columbia Artists at my first day on the job, and I have never sat at a desk before, type of thing. So I had to like learn really fast. I didn't have the benefit of going to NYU music business program. So a lot of this stuff was like, I had no idea. So I would like plow through this book, and I was like, oh wow, this is how it works. You know, it's like, and so this is a really good book written by a very experienced attorney that it basically walks through, and a lot of it is about the commercial side of things, but still it's very helpful to get a good base, and it explains all that, like all the question of rights. You know, he's talking about like copyright and all this stuff, and I was like, what are they talking about? Like, it was so confusing, and it's still confusing even if you really know what it's about. But this gives you a really good sort of background on like, this is how it works. If you play music in public, someone has to pay for it. If you play music on the radio, someone has to pay for it. And there are many examples that you guys have probably seen recently of music that's used without permission. It's like, oops, shouldn't have done that, you know. But so all these kinds of things that are very helpful.
Hey, I'm sorry. And my second question is that like the more I do research, like the more I find out that there are so many different outlets in the music world that like it's just hard to choose. And how do I to what point do I invest in a certain aspect of the music business, I guess, to figure out like which market matches my personal brand the best?
Don't be afraid to try new things. Don't feel like you have to limit yourself to one outlet. in music right away, try several different avenues at the same time, and then try several more, and really see what matches you. I would say don't necessarily just go after the money. Go after what you can be passionate about and create your best art within.
Okay, thank you.
So I think we have time for one last question.
My name is Meredith Riley, and I just graduated from grad school in May. And it's kind of a sub-question from, forgive me, Malcolm's mother's name I forgot, but I remembered Malcolm's name. But I'm wondering, Maxwell, oh, perfect, awesome, off to a great start. So I was wondering if the same advice applies so I was the enthusiastic person about student loans, and I'm not in great debt, but is the same advice applicable to me that, or someone in my situation, would you still advise someone to invest in a publicist when they have already invested? For instance, I believe I kind of made a personal investment by taking out student loans for living expenses so that I could study with a certain teacher when I went to grad school. So in my eyes, I've already made quite a large personal investment that it's gonna take time for me to pay off. So I guess I'm wondering, if I wanted to build my brand as well, would you advise me to keep investing in that way, or would you say it's more important to get loans taken care of?
I'd say it's up to you. You could get a job now with a degree and pay off your loans, or you could be a business person and take a huge risk and invest in yourself. You just, it's like a compass. You have to have a feeling, because you never know. You can get 1 gig or 4 gigs or 1 contract that could pay off your student loans in a month. You could. It's really possible. There are people that are making that kind of money. And you know what? In music business, you may make a lot of money, and then a year and a half, and you have nothing. So you have to, sometimes, but yeah, I'd say take a risk if you're strong enough to just be out there and deal with the storms of, what comes in life and the music business.
One really quick practical point, just jumping off what Akila mentioned about budgeting. There's a simple rule of thumb budgeting equation you can use, which is 50-20-30. And so 50% of your income should be spent, no more than that, on sort of fixed expenses, things like rent, utilities, the things you have to pay. You should try to put at least 20% of, this is your take-home money, income. Try to put at least 20% towards financial considerations, financial investments, so either retirement or paying off debt or those kinds of things, or creating an emergency fund. And then 30% can keep the last 30% focused towards, sort of flexible spending. It could be, lifestyle choices. I want to live in a particular place. I like to go out to eat. I like to do those things. But that's where you can kind of adjust, right? So if you say that, well, you know what, looking at my budget right now, I'm spending 30% on my financial investments because I pay my debt. Well, 2 things you can do. One is you can adjust what you're spending in other categories, or you can look for new ways to generate some more income, right? And then you can kind of equalize the ratio. And you might even say that, you know what, I'm going to put aside a certain amount for this purpose, for a publicist, or for whatever that decision you make, that extra expense that's really critical to your career, and then commit to it and be flexible in some other areas. So that's not I don't know all the fixed numbers or anything like that, but that's a way to kind of create a strategy around this. It's going to help you make that decision of whether that big risk is worth it.
Great. And I would also say you can pay more than the minimum payment. I would highly encourage you to pay as much on your debt, since you said you don't have a lot. Take the sacrifice of maybe a year or 2 years of doing both at the same time. Invest in your career, but also see how much more you can pay on your debts to get rid of them faster. Max out how much you're paying. Yes, you want to have some flexible spending money to still live your life, but see how much of that you can curtail just for a year or 2 years to get the debt paid down faster.
Absolutely. Thank you so much.
Are we out of time, or?
I'm so sorry. I just wanted to jump in on her question really quickly, because I think we are in a time right now in this country where the student loan debt is out of control and it's getting worse and worse. And this idea of debt to income ratio is a really big deal in every other basically industry and major, et cetera, except for in the performing arts. Can you briefly, clearly, speak to, this young woman was talking about, now I have all this debt, but the point before you take on this debt, what kind of questions that students need to be asking themselves going into music school and conservatory, and that amount of money that they're going to have to take out loans for, how much is too much is basically I'm asking the question.
Well, I can just say that speaking from my perspective at University of Michigan, I think we're very aware of that and do a really good job. I saw my colleague Laura Hoffman here in the room. I don't know if she's still here, who is really conscious of that. And I think part of it is that, we can't, everybody has to make their own decisions, but part of it is having the information the best information available, right? So if you're not aware that the loan you're taking is going to be the equivalent of buying a house, then how do you, it's sort of like an invisible risk you don't even realize you're taking. So I think some of the questions that students should be taking are related to what, knowing, for example, what your monthly payment is going to be when you're done. And we know, like, ballpark, if you have for every $10,000 of loans, student loans, you can estimate $1,000 per month, right? I'm sorry, $100 per month. $100 per month, sorry. But thinking about the $100,000 student debt is a pretty normal amount, right? So that's a student who might have $1,000 a month. So having those conversations early on, before students take on the debt, I think is really important, and that's a conversation that a lot of students don't have. So that's incumbent upon universities, but I think also upon other people, in the lives of those students. So.
All right, I think we're out of time, so thank you, everyone.
Thanks.